Okay, so Obamacare, also known as the Affordable Care Act, was signed into law in March of 2010. This was the biggest overhaul of healthcare since Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. So Obamacare was designed to increase quality and affordability. Since then, the number of uninsured adults in the United States has gone from 18% to about 11%, which is definitely a positive, but it has faced its problems. So when it opened, they experienced really trash website and server problems. The website healthcare.gov, here's a picture of it right here. The system is down at the moment. This kept happening like over and over and over. The website was not equipped to handle the amount of traffic, even though that they wanted 20 million people to enroll on this website. It wasn't not even, capable of holding 1 million people at one time. So since the passage of Obamacare, the United States overwhelmingly, people who pay for their health care have experienced higher premiums, higher deductibles. It is only insuring about half of the people that it was originally, speculated that it would. 2016, we actually saw double-digit percentage increases for premiums, which is like one of the first times that's ever happened. It's really bad. So another reason why people are critical of it is because remember I told you it's gone from 18% to 11% uninsured. 89% of those newly insured adults are actually insured under Medicaid, not Obamacare. And that's bad because Medicaid is more expensive for the American taxpayer, and not as many doctors accept new Medicaid patients as ACA patients. So as of right now, they're trying to repeal and replace, so we'll see what happens. The Occupy Wall Street movement began in September of 2011 in the Wall Street Financial District of New York City. They were protesting social and economic inequality worldwide. Their slogan was, "We are the 99%." So the protesters were mostly young, of various backgrounds and religions, but overwhelmingly white, 81% white, mostly employed. I would say they were 85% of them were employed. 85% of them earned over $75,000 a year. Most of them were, disproportionately wealthy white males. So that's why this movement got a lot of criticism. But they did largely influence the movement for higher wages. And they had a massive movement in 2012, the May Day March, which had between 50,000 and 100,000 people marching, which is huge. So they got a lot of criticism for their, lack of leader, lack of cohesiveness, whining about a problem, offering no solution, and then some anti-Semitism. A lot of these people said things like the Jews control Wall Street and stuff, not good. Don't ask, don't tell. So don't ask, don't tell was a law banning homosexual and bisexual people from serving in the military, signed into law in 1994 under President Bill Clinton. So what it says is, this is the reasoning the Clinton administration gave for this law, is that it prohibits people who demonstrate a propensity or an intent to engage in homosexual acts because their presence would create an unacceptable risk to the high standards of morale, good order, and discipline and unit cohesion that are the essence of military capability. I know. So there are two parts of this law, the don't ask part and the don't tell part. The don't ask part says that superiors cannot initiate investigation of a service member's orientation without witnessing disallowed behaviors. You can't just think someone's gay and start an investigation into them to get them, discharged. Eventually that was sort of expanded to don't pursue, don't harass, meaning that even peers can't question you. So the don't ask part is that the military literally cannot ask you what your sexual orientation is. The don't tell part is that you literally are not legally allowed to tell them. It prohibits any homosexual or bisexual person from disclosing his or her sexual orientation. They can't speak about any relationships, including marriage, while serving. If they're found to be in a homosexual relationship, they would be discharged unless there were special circumstances. So this is actually upheld by 5 separate courts of appeal, but finally repealed and ended in September of 2011 with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act. In total, almost 14,000 servicemen and women were discharged due to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. And we actually guessed that it was much higher than this because not everyone disclosed the reason for why they were discharged. Benghazi. So the Benghazi attack happened on September 11th of 2012. These were two separate military attacks and assaults on U.S. compounds in Libya. Benghazi is in Libya. So the first attack happens just after nightfall. Our ambassador to Libya, this guy right here, Chris Stevens, was in Benghazi with this man right here, Sean Smith, checking on the progress of plans to build a Libyan cultural center and hospital. Oh, sorry. That's why they were there. Now, the U.S. came under sort of attack at this moment because of a movie trailer for a movie called The Innocence of Muslims, which was an anti-Muslim movie being released that year. And overwhelmingly, I mean, the American people were very offended by this and did not like it, but it was on YouTube. It was an American film, so we sort of got the blame for all of it. So the city of Benghazi and the government of Libya had basically was falling apart, and they had no law enforcement. So they had started hiring private security contracting groups in Libya to serve as law enforcement. And one of them was a radical Islamic militant group, which today is listed as a terror organization. Just after it became dark that night, these militants cut off all roads leading into the U.S. Compound with gun trucks. They entered with RPGs, which are rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades, AK-47s, F-2000s, diesel canisters, mortar rounds, machine guns, and artillery mounted on gun trucks. So basically a fully equipped military unit. They began attacking the compound, and there were only about 7 people in the compound. Now, we saw it happen immediately on security cameras. Like, as soon as they came in, the people inside knew, and they made 3 phone calls. First, they called for help in Tripoli, which wasn't too far away, hoping that they could get to them and help them out. The second call was to Washington, D.C., asking for immediate help and evacuation. The third call was to another U.S. force in Benghazi, less than a mile away, at a CIA annex. They sort of got to the back of the building, and then after that, the attackers set the building on fire. So one of the agents there, a guy named Strickland, had gotten Chris Stevens and Sean Smith into this bathroom, and they were climbing out a window. And then in all of the smoke, gunfire, and chaos and everything, Strickland lost Smith and Stevens and couldn't find them. So when he went back to find them, all he could find was Sean Smith's dead body. He could not find Chris Stevens. So Sean Smith is dead. Chris Stevens is missing. At that point, the CIA that was in town had been trying to leave, but they were continuously being told no by the CIA headquarters back in Washington, D.C., and the CIA director, who was, what was his name? David Petraeus. The 2 CIA agents, Tyrone Woods and Glenn Dougherty, finally just were like, we're not waiting any longer. We don't care what we're being told. We're going to go anyway. So they make it to the annex, or they make it to the compound, where they find Strickland and Sean Smith's body. They get everyone onto a truck. They can't find Chris Stevens, but they decide they're just going to go back to the annex and then sort of regroup and figure out what they want to do next. They head to the annex. The whole way there, they're being hit by AK-47s and hand grenades, basically a moving battle. When they finally get there, their truck is on fire, and they have 2 flat tires. Just after midnight is when the second attack comes. The annex comes under machine gun, rocket, and mortar fire. Now, the agents do manage to hold off the attack until morning, but in the attack, the agents, Woods and Dougherty, who had, gone against orders to rescue these guys, were killed in the firefight. That morning, they did manage to get out and get to the airport, fighting once again the whole way. And they make it to the airport and evacuate 30 people, including 6 State Department officials and Sean Smith's body. By this time, they still hadn't found Chris Stevens. It turns out that after that Islamic militant group had left to follow them to the CIA annex, a group of Libyan civilians had gone into the building and found Chris Stevens semi-conscious. This is him right after he's pulled out of the building here by Libyans. They had taken him to a nearby hospital where they did CPR on him for about an hour and a half, but he was finally pronounced dead of smoke inhalation. So a total of 4 people were killed: Sean Smith, Glenn Dougherty, Tyrone Woods, and Chris Stevens. Now, what makes the Benghazi attack a scandal is how this whole thing had been handled and could have been prevented. There are a lot of people who got blamed for this. The most amount of blame was placed on the State Department and our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. In June, there had been bombings in Benghazi, outside, or in Libya, outside of the U.S. consulate. And so from that moment, Chris Stevens had been asking repeatedly from the State Department for more security, and that request was repeatedly denied. He had even found outside contractors in Libya willing to provide security, but Hillary Clinton said no to that as well. The CIA and David Petraeus got plenty of blame. It took them, over an hour to respond once the fighting began. And why didn't they know about this ahead of time? They're the CIA. Their reach is so expansive. They should have known. A lot of blame is also placed on the Libyan government. We had a long since an agreement with the major, countries of the world that said that it was a host country's responsibility to take care of foreign diplomatic buildings. However, the State Department knew that the Libyan government was so unstable that they weren't actually capable of doing that. So, we should have known. So the House of Representatives has to do an investigation of this. They formulate the House Select Committee on Benghazi, and they are going to be chaired up by the South Carolina Representative Trey Gowdy, who is a former criminal prosecutor from the state of South Carolina. They investigated, thousands of emails, thousands of pages of documents, hundreds of hours of interviews, thousands of pages of testimony. Through all of that testimony and email and evidence is how we found out about Hillary Clinton's second private email address that wasn't government regulated or protected. Hillary Clinton only even gave her second interview and testimony in this investigation in 2015, where her testimony was televised and lasted for 8 hours. So if you're ever interested in watching Trey Gowdy yell at Hillary Clinton for 8 hours, it is on YouTube. During that testimony is when she said she never emailed anything that was classified, or in which we now know to be false because the FBI did a huge investigation into her emails, and they published multiple emails containing a slew of classified information. So good job, Hill. Edward Snowden. So Edward Snowden is, hotly debated. Is he a hero? Is he a villain? That is for you to decide. So Snowden is actually from Elizabeth City, North Carolina. He was born in 1983 from a military family. In 2004, he joined the Army Reserves. He wanted to serve in Iraq. He was raised in a military family, raised with that idea of you need to help and serve your country. So that's something he wanted to do. Unfortunately, he was injured in a training accident before he could ever serve in Iraq. He broke both of his legs and had to be discharged for medical reasons. After that, he begins to get into working for the government in different ways. He moves to Maryland, where he's working for the University of Maryland, and he really stands out in his department there, in his study of language department, and he's recruited by the CIA. The CIA he works for a few years, and then he starts working for Dell so he can make more money in the private sector. Dell puts him on their NSA contract, so he's working for the National Security Agency for a while through Dell. While he's doing that, he comes across information that the United States has been surveilling the American people and other countries that we shouldn't have been. That's when he first contacts reporter Glenn Greenwald in 2012, who was a reporter for The Guardian. A year later, after working with Glenn, he starts working for another private organization, Booz Allen, and gets even more information on what the NSA had been doing. He also contacted a documentary filmmaker, Laura Poitras. Both Glenn and Laura fly to Hong Kong with Snowden. In 2013, where he releases and leaks this information. The 4 things that you should know. Number 1 is PRISM, a sort of program where the CIA can access your Google and Yahoo accounts. 2 is Tempora, which is a British Black Ops project leaking the United States information that would have been illegal. 3 is something called Boundless Informant, which allows the government to have access to all phones pinged on the Verizon network, whether or not they're on Verizon, if they just ping on a Verizon tower. And then 4 is something called X-Keyscore, which is an analytical tool that allows for the collection of almost anything done on the internet.